Welcome, everybody. On behalf of Ralph Knack, First Deputy Reporter General of APPI, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For this second webinar of the series, IP and Climate Change, jointly organized by AIPPI and ASIPI, two sister organizations that we have been working together for so many years. Today, we have a very interesting topic. For those who attended the first one, the topic at that time was green companies and IP challenges. Now, we have a very interesting issue about trends in IP protection of green technologies. We have three distinguished speakers, one moderator and two speakers, that will provide us this interesting overview about the current trends. First, and before I pass the word to Martin Pitaluga from ASIPI, I want to express my gratitude because of the real support by Leonor Magales, chair of the IPS Sustainability Committee, as well as Marco Zanardi, co-chair of such committee, and all their members, because they have been very supportive, as David, to put all the pieces together. Thanks to all of them. Then, Martin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I will just use 20 seconds to welcome everyone to this webinar. On behalf of ASIPI, we are very happy in working together with IPPI in the organization of these webinars, in this series of webinars. And we hope that everyone enjoy this activity. Thank you, of course, to our speakers, David and Peter, and to our moderator, Giselle, with whom I leave you now to take care of this session. Giselle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. It's an honor to be here. I will go through the housekeeping rules before we start. The questions to the speakers can be submitted using the Q&A box, and we will attend them. We will answer them at the end. If you have any technical problems, please send a message in the chat box to IPPI events. The recording and slides are going to be available upon request to the email events@ippi.org. Something that's very important, we have the translation available to Spanish and Portuguese. And okay, so we will start. I will introduce, before Peter has to leave early. So if you have any questions for him, please do them as soon as possible. So Peter Oxeng, he's the Green Technology and Research Manager of WIPO Green. Peter has more than 30 years of experience in socioeconomic development and natural resources management, and holds a PhD in international development studies. He has lived in South Asia for a decade, working as a researcher, consultant, and head the NIDA Environmental Support Program in Indonesia. Before joining WIPO in 2018, he helped develop the environmental and social safeguard framework and tools for the World Food Program in Rome. At WIPO Green, Peter is responsible for the Green Technology Book, acceleration projects, research, expert guidance, and development of the database of needs and technologies. Peter is also the creator and owner of the website sustainablesuccessstories.org. Then I will introduce David. David Knight is a partner in Brown Rudnick's Intellectual Property Practice Group based in the London office. His practice covers the full range of IP rights, patents, trademarks, designs, copyrights, particularly where such rights are technical in character. The main focus of his practice is patent law. He advises on and conducts both offensive and defensive litigation of IP rights, IP infringement, avoidance, commercial exploitation, and acquisition, and how you use IP for competitive advantage. Often this is done on a multi-jurisdictional basis and covers a wide variety of technology, including renewable energy, aerospace, medical devices, scientific instrumentation, blockchain, printing computers, household products and construction. David has a degree in electronic engineering and practiced as an engineer for a number of years before moving into the law and qualifying as a solicitor. Thank you so much, David and Peter. I will share the floor with you, Peter, right now.
Thank you very much, Giselle. I think I need to, let me see, to find out how to share it here. So that is now, yes, just a second. So thank you very much for having me here. It's great to talk about such a topic that's luckily is very much in interest of a lot of different organizations and people. And unfortunately, the reasons for that is not very good, as you very well know. But it is a subject that has a lot of interesting aspects in it, also for IP professionals and for the whole IP system as such. Now, it's a very big subject, so in very short time here, I'll go through some very central aspects of what it is, where technology is in this, and where we are working with it, and also where IP comes in relation to climate change and the technologies. Now, first of all, you know, climate change is a really big subject. There's still a lot of discussion. Some believe very hard in it, some believe less in it, and so on. It's very complicated. We don't really understand the atmospheric models. Well, our atmospheric models are not that good yet because it's really difficult to understand how it works in detail. But when you talk about climate change, there are two very basic data sets that you can refer to, and which is not really up for discussion because they're measurable. And one here is the temperature and the changes that we're seeing already. So this is the curve that is as observed compared to an average from 1961 to 1990. And you can see that up to now, we are almost up to 1 degree above what we were in that period. And that's over the last 150 years or so. So that is one fact. The other one is the fact that we have a very significant change of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, again, based on measurements. You may recall that CO2 is just a very, very, very small fraction of what is in the atmosphere. You know, it's 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen, then a little bit of about 1% argon, and then the rest is some very small amounts of other gases, and this is where CO2 comes in. And you can see it's all in part per millions, but the concentrations have gone up a lot, and this is over the last 2,000 years. And you can see in the very last part here how it has increased enormously. Now, the whole idea about climate change is that these two sets of data are strictly connected, meaning that the curve that you see there is causing the first curve that we saw in there. So this is the very basis of climate change. This is what we're all talking about. This is what it's really about. And then comes all the other matters later. Now, there's a lot done to try to combat that and go in about it. And to be honest, we're not doing very well. So there is this IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a kind of the closest that you get to a scientific consensus on what is happening in climate change. So they produce, under the UNFCCC, they produce regularly various reports in various aspects of climate change, based on, it comes every 2 years or something, based on a lot of work and hundreds of researchers, which then afterwards goes through the political machinery, the international representatives of the UNFCCC. So it ends up as a report that is showing the latest scientific findings and still has been put through, shall we say, the censorship of the political system, so on. So this is the closest that you get to what we know with very high reliability of what is going on at the moment. Now, one of the latest one is this one here on adaptation. And as you can see, the major one of the conclusions from it, from the text there, is that basically, you know, it's already there, already here. It's pretty much irreversible, and it has a large impact, and it's very difficult for us to, we are not doing far enough to basically combat it. So this is where we are now. There is a lot being done in relation to this. So I mentioned IPCC, UNFCCC. These are the frameworks that try to bring countries together to reach an agreement what to do about this. It's super important because just one country can't do anything alone. It's a global problem. So we normally divide this into mitigation issues and adaptation issues. Very simply put, mitigation is all about trying to avoid the problem, meaning we need to reduce the emissions and increasing the sinks. And sinks basically means anything that can absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. And here, of course, forest is one of the things we hear a lot about, and they can do that, vegetation in general, but also the sea, also the soil. Soil carbon is a big source for CO2 sinks. So that's what that is about. And then we had adaptation, which basically is a matter of activities and tools that will help us to live with the consequences that we are not able to mitigate. And that in its nutshell is about reducing vulnerability and increasing resilience. Just to give you an idea from what vulnerability means in an extreme example. So this is from Niger in West Africa in the Sahelian belt, where I used to do my fieldwork for my master thesis some years ago in that little village there. And this is pretty much in the middle of the desert. Now, this is their fields where they get the produce from. And this is what it looks like about 8-9 months of the year. This is just before the rainy season. And down in these depressions, this is where they grow their millet and their sorghum. Now, coming back to the same spot a few weeks later, this is what it looks like. And you can see the round structure there is the same as there. It's the same spot. The horse is also the same. And this is a completely changed landscape. So now they can grow their sorghum and their millet down here, and the cattle can graze on other areas in there. And they got about 2 or 3 months to do this, and then it will return to the state that it is in top. So you can easily imagine that if there's a slightest change in the precipitation pattern, in the rainfall and so on, that this is going to have a really large impact on their possibilities to do anything, because they got these 2 to 3, 4 months to basically grow something. And on top of that, it's extremely poor societies, so they don't really have a safety net. They don't have any surplus. They don't have any insurances, meaning that if it goes wrong and the risk is very high, then they are really in a difficult situation, and they often have to migrate to other countries to find work. But that is a kind of extreme vulnerability that actually many people are living in, and I'm sure in Latin America also, there are many cases like this. We have, when it comes to technology, under the UNFCCC, we have something called the technology mechanism, which is especially relevant here. And this is something created by the Conference of Parties, which is the yearly meeting for the UNFCCC member states, and where they discuss and find out what to do and what different countries has been doing. These 2 bodies, the Climate Technology Central Network and the Technology Executive. So the first one here is about implementation of technologies, and the other one is about policy. And that means that these are specific bodies that try to see what technology and innovation to promote that for the different states and how they can combat climate change. So we, of course, working closely, especially with CTCN, because it's a deployment, and I'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. Then we have various climate finance funds. So there's a lot of those. There was some multilateral funds where various countries, groups of countries can apply for it. And there is a lot of funding available, but of course not as much as there should be and has been promised. The division between adaptation and mitigation is still much in favor of mitigation. But again, it might not be so difficult to understand, because it's probably best to try to avoid the problem than trying to live with it afterwards. So it kind of follows from that. And then there's carbon credit, which is now something that may have a new chance of having a big impact on it. And it's basically about that you can create a market for trading credits, so that if you're an industry where it's really difficult to do, you can then buy credits somewhere else, and that means that reductions is done somewhere. Complicated, difficult to make work, but on the last COP, the rule book for this was agreed on, so it may come up. Now, Climate change is just one of the environmental problems, and here I listed some time ago just a quick list of some of the major environmental commitments, and your country definitely also has signed up to those, and then there are many more, and there are many more regional agreements. So each country has some commitments already signed for various aspects, and of course climate change is up here on the top with now the national determined contributions, which is the major tool for creating commitment among countries to do something about climate change. Now technology, and now we're getting closer to the IP subject also. So I'm working in a very small unit in WIPO called WIPO Green, and we're specifically there to help to promote the role of innovation and technology in the global challenges, and climate change is one of the big ones. We are a little bit optimistic about technology, and one of the reasons is, for example, this graph here. So this is Moore's law. You probably heard about it. It's nothing to do with climate change, but it's about technological development. So his prediction about how many transistors can fit into an integrated circuitry comes back from 1965, and he made observations over 5 years, as you can see here. This is from the article in Nature. Now, his prediction was only for 10 years, and he said that this is going to continue and actually continue exponential. You can see this is a logarithmic scale. So this was what his prediction was. Now, in reality, if you look at what it looks like up to 2018, again, logarithmic scale, so a straight line means that an exponential growth, you will see that it has actually held true for not only the 10 years he was looking into in the mid-60s, but all the way up to today. If we look at something relevant to climate change here, we can see on the price on solar panel modules, how that has been going down. And you can see here actually the 22% reduction in price for every doubling of cumulative capacity. So again, an exponential, this time not growth if you want, but decrease in prices was also an expression of how technology can develop really fast with solutions for this. Another one here is the number of human genome pairs that you can sequence for $1. And you can see the numbers are just staggering from only within the last 15 years or something, that it has gone up from very few and up to now 30, 40 million base pairs that you can sequence for just $1. And similar developments can be found in probably some of these areas here. This is just what I listed. That I have the impression of where it is. It's not based on a thorough analysis. But these are some of the areas we know it goes very fast, and there are others than that, meaning that technology has a very strong growth in terms of what becomes available. Now, intellectual property is part of making these technologies available and in development. It's a cornerstone of the innovation ecosystem, one of the terms that we operate quite well with here. And not only does the innovation ecosystem generate the technologies, but it also develops the capacity to adapt and adopt the existing technologies. So therefore, IP is also an important factor in technology transfer and in getting the information that goes around the technology also transferred to the recipient countries so that they can use it. Remember, technology transfer is not only technology going from the developed countries to developing countries, it's also the other way around, or from developing countries to developing countries. It's a very broad term, and it goes in many different directions. Now, one of the things that we are in WIPO Green particularly keen about is, or proud about, is the technical information that is generated by the IP system. So you're probably all IP professionals, so you know very well how the patent system works. So it's not a free system. You have to provide something in return for getting exclusive rights for a certain time and a certain territory. And that what you have to provide is detailed information on your technology. Now, if that is done correct, then you actually have an enormous amount of technical information available, which can be used in countries or territories where the patent is not, where there is not a patent, or it can, of course, be used to develop new technology and so on. And that's super important if we want to do something about climate change. Public and private sector, I normally also make the point here because it is should not be seen as two separate areas. There's so much going in between the different sectors. Very often, a lot of the innovation comes from the public sector and then goes on the market through the private sector, but it can go in many different ways. But here's a nice little example from an American researcher, Ms. Masako Kato, from a few years ago, who looked in the technologies that was the foundation for first the iPod here in 2001, and which then was later developed into the iPhone that I think is pretty ubiquitous all over the world. And you will see that all the technologies that are listed around here are from public research institutions in one way or another, many of them from the military. DARPA is the American Advanced Defense Research something institute. And we got CERN also, which is very close to where I'm here in Geneva. And all those are from the public sector and then goes into be put together in a very nice way by a private company who then makes a terrible lot of money on it and produces a gadget that a lot of people are very happy about. So just to make sure that it's clear that public sector and private sector is not two very different structures in relation to innovation. And one of the reasons for that is the innovation ecosystem, because it's very broad. You may be aware that WIPO publishes a very nice report called the Global Innovation Index every year, and they employ at least 81 indicators for to measure the innovation ecosystem in various countries. And that is because innovation ecosystem is not just a matter of having advanced universities and so on. It's also a matter of having the people available. So it goes for the primary school, secondary school, university educations. It's about infrastructure. It's about markets, credit availability, and diversification of markets, and a good business community, research and development funding, and all these kind of things that are necessary to get it out there. Now, sometimes there's a discussion about IP and whether that's actually good for both innovation, but also is it good for sustainability and IP and climate change. Now, the little bit boring message that we normally come with is that we don't necessarily see that IP is different from in climate change is different from any other technologies. So it's pretty much the same situation. You got a new frontline technology, you want to get it on the market, you secure your IP rights, and you set up various licensing agreements and so on and so forth. And it's the same for climate change technologies. And why is that? It's because in climate change, there is no silver bullet. There's no one technology that can change it all. Maybe with the exception of fusion energy, but it's not there yet. And even if it was there, it would take a long time to get it into the market and be able to pay for it. So we don't have one solution. It's not like COVID, where you got 5 or 6 vaccines that more or less solves the problem, and where you can make a lot of different discussions about how to handle that IP-wise. In climate change, it's not. We need thousands of solutions from everywhere. And if you take the case of solar panels, they are available in many different brands and types and so on. So it's a living market. So meaning that it basically follows the same trajectories as other technologies does. In terms of getting technologies in through technology transfer to developing countries and so on, there was a study done by OECD, so not by WIPO, a few years ago, and they were looking at green technologies and how they were patented, and you can see the numbers there on the screen. That is mostly in the US, Japan, and Europe, where not even half of them, but a big part of the green technologies are actually being patented. If we go to developing countries in general, and the big ones also, you can see that it's less than 1% of green tech that has been registered as a patent application in these countries, and go to other developing countries, it's even less, meaning that it's not the patent or the license agreement as such that is a limiting factor for getting technologies out there, because for many of these countries, it's not actually registered as a patent, meaning that it can be used, basically, the use of it is not regulated. We have seen a couple of cases of companies that were reluctant to go into a new country or new market without having patent rights because they were afraid of copying and so on. So that could be a limitation if you don't have the patent there, but that doesn't mean that you can't necessarily apply for a protection in that particular country. So that's just a short introduction to how we normally see from the work that we do that IP interacts in relation to climate change. And I'll just use a couple of minutes here on showing you a couple of assets that might be relevant for you from that we produce here. One is a green technology book, where we have now 2 editions. The first one on climate change adaptation technologies and the second on mitigation technologies. This is a free digital first publication, and we have more than 750 technologies now collected in a special collection in our database that links to this, and have had quite a number of visitors, especially for developing countries. Now, what we try to do with this one is not a sector analysis report as such. It's more like a catalog, and we also, of course, explain what goes on. But we really try to show what is out there of technologies so that people can get inspiration and get an idea of what innovation can actually do. And this image here is from the database, where we have a special connection that everything links up to, and where you can find a lot of technologies. And they will look like this in the database. In the database here, we have, this is again a free online resource that we make here in White Green. We have around 130,000 technologies in it, but most of them are actually patents, and patents are not necessarily a solution. You can't necessarily see if it's on the market. We have developed a special AI-based search function so that if you find a patent in our database, you can launch a special Google search based on an AI analysis of this technology that's described in there, which could help you to find it on the market. But otherwise, what is most important in it is the 4,600 or so user uploads we have. So that is companies that upload their own technologies to the database. And when they do that, it'll look something like this. And then you have a link here to the website of the company, and another one down here where you can contact this company directly. So it's a matchmaking tool where you can directly work with the technologies that you find there and find out whether it's something that's relevant for you. And then finally, we also do matchmaking projects on the ground. We work in 8 countries at the moment, quite a lot in Latin America, as you can see. And basically what we do is, instead of doing big matchmaking events, we actually hire local consultants who has expert knowledge locally and a good network. And we go out and try to find specific needs among farmers or whatever subject we're working on. And then we work as kind of specialized technology agents for these specific units and try to propose them a technical solution, new innovation that can fit into their problem. So based on that, we try to bring them together, and then we hope that it becomes a deployment of a technology, more or less. And then we also produce a number of catalogs of what we find in relation on these projects here in terms of both technologies found as well as needs. Finally, we do have something that might interest IP officers, the ones of you who are from IP officers. We have a project called IPO Green, and this is specifically targeted at what IP officers can do to help their government's ambitions towards a green economy transition and climate change. So we have 13 concept notes there and 6 languages in there that describe what we have observed, what has been done, or what some IP officers are planning to do. And then we have done, it is now 19 webinars with IPOs where they explain what they have been doing. The last one we had was actually with Brazil last week. So with that, I will stop here, and thank you very much for your attention. And I'm sorry if it took a little bit longer than it should have.
Thank you very much, Peter. Are there any tangible ways in which IP and the IP offices can contribute to combating climate change?
Yes, actually, there are. So what I just showed on the very last latest slide here was the IPO Green project. Now we can see that there's actually a very large, for many IP officers, there's a very pertinent interest in doing something. So some IP officers have a very narrow mandate. They basically do go through the patenting processes and procedures and so on. Others has a much broader mandate, which also is to promote innovation in their country and get technologies out there. So we see that several countries, Brazil is an example, Chile is an example, Argentina, Peru, some of the countries we work with there, that they're very interested in getting their message out to, or helping their clients, the ones who actually patent with them, in various ways. One of them is to make business round, matchmaking events, work in projects like what we do, acceleration projects. Very common thing is to do patenting acceleration or speedy treatment of patent applications for green technologies. Many countries actually do that. Some countries, it's not that popular really, because some companies are not that interested in actually going through the system too fast. In other countries, it's much more relevant. Making analysis of what comes up locally and of patents that are relevant for climate change is something that several offices are doing also. Australia, UK, for example, Brazil again. Several offices are a lot involved in that. And then there are several other ways that it can be done, but there is actually quite a lot that can be done. And if you go in on that site there on the web page of WIPO Green, there's a special tab for AIPPI Green, and you can see on these concept notes examples of what can be done and what is being doing. Thank you.
Wonderful. David, we have a question for you. What are patent offices doing to assist the green agenda?
I think that's somewhat similar question posed to Peter just now, and he's already given some good explanations around that. But I just want to sort of perhaps tease out a little bit more about the accelerated patent examinations. That's one of the ones that's most often talked about and most pertinent maybe to many applications for patents. But I think it's fair to say that it doesn't have a huge take-up, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. If one steps back and asks what's the patent process for, part of it, of course, is to disseminate knowledge. And the faster the patent application goes through the system, the faster that knowledge will be disseminated. And if you've got new green technology coming through, that's a good thing. But that's looked at from a global perspective and not from the patent applicant's perspective. And from their perspective, they have to ask the question, well, why do I want to go through the system faster? What it tends to mean is it accelerates their cash burn on the examination process. But it can be a bit of a two-edged sword when it comes to raising finance, which clearly if you've got a good granted patent, that's going to assist in any patent, any financing of the business. But equally, if it gets knocked back a bit during the process, that's going to be detrimental as well. So it has to be examined in the round. I think there's sometimes some talk the process is not promoted enough. My personal view on that, that's probably not a fair excuse for why it's not taken up, because I think most patents, the applicant uses professional patent attorneys to do the drafting and prosecution, and in my experience, all very well attuned with the different options that are available in all the different jurisdictions of the world. So I think a lack of publicity is probably not one of the reasons we don't see so much take up of the accelerated process.
Great, thank you. Then Peter, is it compulsory? Is compulsory licensing relevant for climate change technologies?
Thank you, Giselle. So compulsory licensing is something that is discussed a lot in relation to trade and so on, and it came up a lot through the COVID crisis a couple of years ago. And there can be many good reasons to consider this, especially if you have like the silver bullet technology that can really solve the problem. And as I mentioned early on, in climate change, we need thousands of technologies. There is not one single technology that can solve climate change. And technology is not the solution to climate change either. We need to do many more things than that. So therefore, it's I find it very difficult to see what would be the candidate technology that could be relevant to, that has so much global importance that it should be available to everybody, and in terms of that. And furthermore, where you can say that is actually the patenting issue or the licensing issue that is a constraining factor. As I mentioned before, it's not something we have come across in the work that we do. We work a lot with getting technologies out there in specific countries for specific settings. And so far, we have not seen that to be the major limiting factor. So therefore, I find it very unlikely to see that there would be any technology that would be in climate change that would be relevant for such considerations.
Thank
If I
you.
could just
David, yeah.
So just add a thought there. As I know compulsory licensing is something we looked at quite intensely at the AIPPI Standing Committee a few years ago, and it generated some quite diverse opinions on it. I mean, if you take the sort of the archetypal bad behavior example of an oil company buying up green patents and sitting on them, not exploiting it, it's very easy to make an emotional case then for compulsory licensing. But the experience, there's a sweeping generalization, and forgive me, but the experience of those experience the patent world in more sort of second and third world countries were there that the compulsory licensing regimes they had there quite often used just to allow the government to get access to cheaper products, cheaper drugs or whatever, and it has a certain amount of disrepute attached to it, and they were sort of quite strongly against there being any kind of compulsory licensing situation. So I think it's one that always should be looked at and considered, but I think it's difficult to find. My personal view, it would be difficult to find a balance that's sort of balancing things out fairly and equitably.
That's interesting. This is a question for both of you. How much should we rely on innovation and technology to solve climate change crisis?
One part of me wants to say, I was at the engineer coming out of me saying, yes, technology is going to be the solutions that are going to get us out of this problem. The reality is, though, I think too many members of the public think, oh, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to change my behaviors because the engineers and scientists tomorrow are going to come up with a magic bullet and I can carry on as before. So undoubtedly, innovation is going to and has to play a role in mitigating the climate crisis. But everyone has to change their habits as well. And I think we have to move on in our perspectives on life.
Yeah, I can only concur what David says there. It's I think it's probably relatively fair to say that technology kind of got us into trouble with climate change in the first place, right? Because it's through technology that we found out this with fossil fuel and how to burn it, how to use it, all kinds of genius ways. So, I mean, of course, therefore, also technology is part of the solution for bringing down these emissions and helping us to adapt and all that. But that said, it's in the whole climate change discussions going back in time, technology originally was not very well, not seen with very kind eyes, mostly because a lot of people were afraid that it would be seen as an easy shortcut to, just solve the climate problems and then we can continue living as we did before. Where I think there's a general consensus now that technology in itself is not the solution. We don't have the technology that can solve all the problems. We have many solutions. We have many more coming up. We wrote in the Green Technology book last year that probably we have around 80% of the technologies available to meet our 2030 goals. We don't have the technologies to meet our 2050 goals, but we actually have a lot. So there's no excuse to sit around and say, oh, we need to wait for the next breakthrough in whatever technology. No, the technologies, most of them are already there and they are available. They cannot solve it all. We still need to make fundamental changes in the way that we work, that we live, that we consume, that we get transported and all that. That we also need to do. But technology does have great potential, I think, for doing a lot, and a lot more than it is doing now. It's not going fast enough. That's the basis for our theory of change is basically to speed up that as much as technology is able to provide solutions for some of it.
Great. And in Latin America, which country is more developed in this matter?
In terms of climate technologies?
Yes.
Oh, that depends a bit on what you're talking about. Again, it's such a broad field. But most of the innovation comes from developed countries, from Europe, from the USA, China a lot. China has been doing immense impacts on the availability of solar panels and batteries and so on, and still are. So it's really a global thing. But we also see that there are a lot of very good solutions in developing countries. They are a little bit harder to find. We try very hard to include them as much as we can in the green technology book, in the database also. But our experience is that they're harder to find because they're not so visible on the global arena, on the internet, and so on. Probably because, well, I don't know why, but there could be many potential reasons for that. So it is dominated by Europe, Japan, Korea, China, USA, and so on. But they're definitely not alone. There is a lot coming up and very nice, well-adapted technologies. It's in a database, for example, it's important for us that we are inclusive, right? We don't want to focus only on the best and the most efficient and the most fancy or the most expensive solutions. We also have all the solutions in there that may not necessarily be the most advanced or the most efficient, but it may be exactly what you need in the context you are. So what works in Burkina Faso, in Ouagadougou, may not necessarily work here in Geneva, and the other way around. So, we need the whole diversity. And remember, green technology does not mean that it's a sustainable technology necessarily. It just means that it's better than the technology that came before it. So, and it's the same with climate change. We do technologies that help us to reduce emissions, but they may also cause other problems. We try to avoid that as much as possible, but sometimes that is part of the game. But it always brings us into a better position than we were before. Otherwise, it wouldn't be interesting as a green technology. Thank you.
That's interesting. And where is innovation and technology most important, in mitigation or adaptation? Maybe Peter, you can start, and then David, you can give us your thoughts.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, most of the attention goes towards mitigation, and it's also a very heavy technology field. So this mitigation is definitely where there is most technology innovation going on. And we can see, we meet it every day. I think in all the countries where the audience here are from, we see the rise of solar panels, electric vehicles, and so on. So these are all mitigation-oriented technologies. There are some sectors that are really difficult to do something about, like steel and cement and some of the big heavy industries and so on. And their technology might be find a little bit more difficult. Adaptation is an area that is super interesting technology-wise, although it's not so prevalent. That's why we made the first edition of the Green Technology focus on adaptation technology, because there's less attention on it, but the importance is increasingly is increasing, and it's a very broad field. So therefore, there are many. Basically, adaptation is about decreasing vulnerability, increasing resilience. So it's a lot about community development, really. I mean, making people able to have a surplus and be in a better position to withstand shocks that comes in one way or another. It can be shocks in prices, or it can be droughts or floods or whatever. If you're in a better, wouldn't say development state, but if you're a richer community and you have more resources and you have a good resource base, then you are more able to withstand that also. So therefore, a lot of adaptation is actually a lot about traditional development that has been tried to be done for the last 2 or 3 or 4 decades, if not longer. And that means that the variety of technology that comes in there, in agriculture, in cities, in coastal protection, in water access and conservation, and all these things are all super important technologies nowadays. And I think the attention is increasing a lot in that field also. Thank you.
What are your thoughts, David?
I largely echo what Peter said, and also partly I think mitigation in some respects is an easier sell to the public. It basically means doing what you're basically doing already, but switch it slightly different way. So driving an electric vehicle rather than a petrol diesel vehicle. Okay, there is a step change there, but fundamentally it's pretty much the same sort of thing. But to take that example further, I think that we're sort of beginning to see more in this country anyway. So moving to car sharing models, and that's something which actually means probably need to have less steel and batteries and anything else going into producing the vehicle in the first place, and making more use of that resource. And I think that is going to come, but that takes a bigger mental change, I think, in the mind of the public. But it is developing, and I'm sure will continue to develop. And I see that. that's very much the way my children work now. They're not buying cars; they're just picking them up with an app and driving them for 24 hours, and that's it.
And again, David, that's a good point, because also here technology is important, right? The sharing
Absolutely.
apps, that's the technology development also, relying on the internet and all that. And it works. And we're going to see, I hope at least, much more of that in the future.
Yep.
And regarding Latin America, what are the main climate change risks?
Well, I can start on that one. So in general, it's really hard to say exactly what is going to happen in each region or going down to each province or whatever, because of the climate models are not good enough for doing those kind of things. But Latin America has a lot of agricultural production, and there's a lot of dependent on that. And the agriculture is, of course, one of the most vulnerable areas to climate change. And we see it already in terms of, take a country like Chile, which has this very, very long gradient from north to south. And already there now, the climate is impacting on fruit production, on wine production, and many other important agricultural areas. So I think that considering the great importance of agriculture in Latin America, I think that Latin America is a region, a continent, a part of the world where there is going to be, unfortunately, a lot of changes coming quite soon. Not necessarily more than other countries, but there is a certain vulnerability related to the agricultural production. Then again, Latin America is in a much better position than many other parts of the world to actually be able to come up. There's a lot of innovation going on and so on. So there's, but I think that's probably one of the main areas.
David?
Yes, not a lot I can add. I mean, I think it's a big continent with vastly different climatic regions across it, and climate change is going to affect them each differently. Some will get drier, some will get wetter, some will get hotter, some will get colder. Just because of the way that the climate change will affect the jet stream patterns and everything else. So it's way beyond my expertise as a point to a particular region and say, well, I think this is likely to happen there and this is likely to happen elsewhere. But I think it's going to change things, and that's going to impact agriculture and people's lives. And where you used to go skiing, you might not be able to go skiing anymore, or vice versa.
Just David, going back to what you were saying about the green agenda, what else can the IP system do to promote the green agenda?
Going back to our standing committee, when we discussed this a few years ago, we talked about a number of things I already mentioned, compulsory licensing. Another issue we discussed, and this very much sort of feeds back to the point Peter made earlier about some technologies like fusion, for example, have an awful long lead-in time. So should we be therefore, for example, having a system which extends the life of patents, where there is such a long lead-in time, so at least means the innovators can get some commercial return from their technology and their innovation. And again, we had some very differing views on that topic. I mean, I don't know how many will be familiar with supplementary protection certificates, which is a European scheme recognizing that for pharmaceuticals, it can take a long time to bring a pharmaceutical product to market by the time one's been through all the regulatory regimes. And therefore, there's a defined system in place for adding life onto the end of the patent if the right boxes are ticked. And one could, at one level, one can see a very easy transition for SPC type system onto green technologies where they take a long time to come to market. My personal view on it is that it wouldn't work. The SPC system has clearly defined dates, has clearly defined products to which it applies. And yes, there is litigation around SPCs, but by and large, it's clear cut. Everyone knows what it does and how it works, and that's it. Job done. But with a sort of a green technology system, how are you going to decide as well what date could you first launch a product? What were the barriers to it coming along? Is it the right sort of green technology to fall within this system or not. And as someone who spent most of my professional life involved in litigation of IP rights, I do recognise that for most businesses, litigation is where you don't want to go, and therefore any kind of system that is likely to generate more litigation is probably not a good direction. So I'm more in favour of keeping it simple, and it's just the standard 20 years, whatever the technology is, and for better or for worse. Sometimes it'll be better, sometimes it'll be for worse. And of course, the other side of the coin is if you extend the life of a patent, yes, that's helpful for the innovator, but also then becomes a barrier to someone else as well. So there's that aspect to take into account. So as I say, my personal view is keep it is, don't go there, but there are others with different views, and they're very valid views as well.
Thank you. We'll go back to that topic in a minute. Like Peter has to leave early, I just want to ask you both 2 questions from the participants. Do you think that associations such as ASIPI and AIPPI could support WIPO Green by becoming WIPO Green members?
Organization AIPPI, yeah, you can definitely become a partner of WIPO Green. We have several of those. We have 150 partners, more or less, ranging from very, very big companies to NGOs, to SMEs, to intellectual property officers and organizations. So that can all be done. For other organizations, such it's not necessary to become a partner with WIPO Green to interact with us. The first place to start is basically to use and upload to the database. So if you are a company or you know of technologies and so on that could be relevant, you can just register and then upload to the database as such, and there's no use, there's no cost or anything, and that is just a matter of registering. So there are many ways that we can work together with various organizations and companies. We work a lot with the private sector, of course, to promote innovation and green technology in relation to climate things and change technologies. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go on to the next question. This question is for Peter. You mentioned that most green technology innovation takes place in developed countries, and that oftentimes the technology developed, for example, Japan, is not necessarily adapted to the context of a developing country, for example, Kenya. Could utility models be used as an incentive tool for inventors and companies to repurpose their inventions to the context of developing countries?
Right. Not quite sure what is understood with a utility model here, but in order to get a technology and get it adopted and adapted to the local situation, that is sometimes a big issue and can be very complicated. Now, there are a lot of both open innovation and cooperation that takes place between companies and innovators in countries like Japan and other countries. And I think that's very much the way to go, is to establish these cooperation agreements and then sort out the different licensing agreements around that early on, to then develop a solution that actually works well in the local context, and where, you know, spare parts and so on can also to be developed locally. So I think there's a lot of good examples on this happening already. If you really want to get it out there on these markets, then that's probably what can be done. But then again, also sometimes these markets are small, so that can be a limiting factor, I suppose, for many big companies. But then we have the IP system, right? We have all the technology and all the databases, which is all there to be used and to be used as inspiration for developing new models. And for me, that is one of the really fantastic things about the patent system, is this huge amounts of technology that is available. And we have in WIPO, we have the patent scope database. Is a public database. There's more than 100 million patents in there. And they're not that easy to find your way around sometimes, because there are so many, and they're not always written in a great language, but they are there. And probably today AI can help us to actually make a nice resume of a patent that is maybe not so clear in the formulation. So it's basically just to look for it. And thank you for having me. Unfortunately, I have to run for another meeting now. It's been a pleasure being here. I apologize very much that I have to cut it short.
Thank you very much. David, I have a question from one of the participants. It says, How does the IP system harm the green agenda, and can anything be done to change it?
Well, depending on which side of the fence one sits. I mean, some people say, well, someone's got a patent and I want to operate in that space, and I've got some green technology that's an improvement to it. That originating patent is blocking my access. So you could say the IP system is harming in that respect. But I think one has to go back and ask the fundamental questions of why we have a patent system, an IP system. It is to give innovators a fair reward for their innovation. There will be many circumstances where 20 years exclusivity is not a fair solution. There'll be many places where it is, but it's just a balance which has to be struck. So yes, I can see an argument the IP system harms in that sense, but I think taken as a totality, it doesn't. The other area where I think the IP system harms the green agenda is actually when it comes to enforcement activities. And if a product is found to be infringing, the standard order across most courts of the planet are that those infringing goods, then have to be destroyed. And of course, that goes completely anti to any kind of green agenda to destroy perfectly good products that have taken natural resources to make and ship around the planet and what have you. So why destroy them? And that's another issue we're looking at AIPPI at the moment. How whether there's anything changes around that can be made to balance those, because if there is a counterfeit good, a counterfeit handbag, for example, yes, the traditional approach is yes, that should be taken off the market, but maybe the system needs to have some more flexibility these days, that provided, for example, the distinguishing mark, or there was a trademark dispute, is indelibly removed, maybe rather than total destruction, just removal of that label. These days, generally speaking, it's just easier to order the destruction of the goods as a whole. And of course, if it's just a logo on the side of a handbag that's infringing, one can see how it's comparatively easy to take off that logo. But if the shape of the handbag is iconic or something like that, so really the whole product is where the IP lies. Much more difficult to remove it from circulation without destroying it. But it's an interesting question, and I think at the moment I don't think it's one courts are really grappling with, because the law just says, well, yes, it should be no more infringing products on the market and destruction, without really sort of maybe giving any guidance as to how they should be destroyed in a green way, or what alternatives there are to destruction.
Very interesting. We're running out of time. We have 2 more questions from the participants. In terms of patent drafting for the green sector, do you have any recommendations?
First of all, I don't draft patents myself, so I'm looking at things from the side. So I give that caveat. No, I think this echoes something that Peter said earlier. I don't think when it comes to green patents, there's anything different. It's all about the same process of properly identifying the invention, properly recording that invention in the patent specification, and seeking the appropriate monopoly or claims that are appropriate to that patent. It's still going to have a 20-year life like anything else. Just one still has to do the sort of the forward-looking and try and guess where technology will be in 20 years' time to make sure the claims are appropriate. But I don't see green technology, although innovation in green technology is, as we discussed, critically important. I don't think that the patenting process around that is any different.
And I will ask the last question. Considering the issue of compulsory licensing, could an increase of trades could be an interest of trade secrets to protect green technology?
Yes, I mean, My view has long been my view, and this exists outside of green technologies, is the best form of IP protection is a mix of the different IP rights, notably patents and confidential information. To the extent one can, without falling foul of the full disclosure obligations. Yes, if you can keep part of your technology back as confidential information, do so. Don't put it all in the patent application. Make sure the patent application covers the basics, but doesn't give away all the sort of the secrets that maybe go with optimizing a product or process. So, yeah, absolutely. Confidential information is part of the portfolio. Whether you should keep more as confidential information in order to avoid possible compulsory licensing, yes, I can see some arguments in that, but I think we're probably many years away before there's any changes around compulsory licensing, particularly in the green field. So for me, I think it'd be business as usual, and I wouldn't let that tail be the tail that wags the dog on this particular point.
Great. No, thank you so much. David, before we pass on the word to Martin to do the closing, do you have any last conclusions or recommendations you would like to give our IP professionals in the region?
No, I'd just like to thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been a great pleasure being here, and not I can see the audience, but speaking to the audience. So I thank you for the time and this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Martin Michaus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giselle. Thank you, Peter and David, for this outstanding presentation and provide us an overview about what is the situation right now of the climate change and the link with IP. We thank all the attendees, of course, and invite you for our next webinars, the positive impact of innovation on climate change on August 29. Please stay tuned. It will be interesting. We'll have very good two speakers. And also the last one on sustainable IP enforcement on November 7, that we have been discussed how we should change these issues enforcement if the counterfeit goods should be destroyed, or what will be the transformation. I heavily invite you to keep an eye again in AIPPI and ASIPI LinkedIn email for further communications. Again, you will receive the invitation, but just stay tuned. And also, just before I said goodbye, you can see the other ones. Please, as you know, we're just close to the next AIPPI Congress in Guangzhou from 19th to the 22nd of October. If you have not registered, please do it. And also, we also invite to the ASIPI Panama Congress that is going to be very relevant because to be celebrated the 60 years foundation of ASIPI. So it will be a very important event. So we're invited to both events. And we'll stay tuned and see you. Hope to see you in our next webinar. Thanks all the team behind the screen, Giselle, Cinzia, Elsa, all the translators, and again, all the members of the Substantive Committee of Sustainability of AIPPI, as well as ASIPI, to put all the speakers together. Thank you so much.